I'm Nicola Talent and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. The sentence hearing of Barry Young, the crime boss from Sligo, would give you a sense of be careful what you wish for.
Yeah.
He obviously wanted to take on, the drug beat in Sligo, and he got his opportunity when Patrick Irwin was jailed for 7 years. He moved in there, got what he'd always dreamed of, and whoa, wasn't great, was it?
An empire of dust, is that what they say? Yeah, I mean, Barry Young has pled guilty to directing a criminal gang, and he was up for sentencing this week, though they didn't give a final sentence, but they went through the basic case against him. And, Barry Young obviously had a feared reputation, just justifiably, but we heard quite a lot about his being racked with anxiety and his struggles, to cope with living the life as a notorious crime boss.
Yeah. So, look, it was very interesting that we got a little insight into the structure of a crime gang like Young's, because essentially it is a rural crime gang that's operating. They have overlords maybe in Dublin, in the bigger gangs who've been about and are more powerful. They're suppliers in the area, and he's top of the chain of his group, which included 20 members, we're told, during the sentence hearing, and that's one of 4 groups operating in Sligo. If you took that as an average, you're talking about 80, high-end drug dealers operating in the Sligo area alone.
Yeah, it's 80. That's 80 full-time employees, I suppose.
Yeah,
if you want to look at it that way. Yeah, I mean, I think you really see how, from the description there, which obviously Barry Young accepted and pled guilty to, you see really how these rural crime gangs are really kind of franchises. They have their supply drugs, which you heard evidence about how there was people on top of him in Dublin. He had 20 drug dealers working for him, all with their little patches. They were organised in cells, so other people amongst those 20, everybody didn't know what each other was doing.
Right.
And then
that's a Kinahan structure, if ever there was.
100%, that's a Kinahan structure. And then you heard how, because he was part of this franchised business, that if he had trouble with debts, for example, he could call up the people in Dublin, and they would send out a worker to deal with the problem that couldn't be connected necessarily to Barry Young. So he didn't have to use one of his 20 guys to collect debts. He could contract in somebody,
an outsider, an enforcer.
Yeah, and that was one of the benefits of being part of this franchise, I suppose.
Yeah. It's probably easier being, if you did take that job in a drug gang, being able to dip in and out and not have to live in the neighbourhoods where, the people that you were strong-arming for money.
Yeah, I mean, there was a funny bit in it as well where he describes, being wary of sending that guy out because he's a mental header ball, was the term used. So they were getting in these guys, one of them described as a Russian, these guys who have no connection with Sligo, and they'd just be sent down to smash up houses and everything.
So these were smaller debts?
These are smaller debts, but, and it said in court that, the guards, who were sort of relatively, gave some sort of favourable evidence to Barry Young, how he had a preference for not using violence to collect debts. However, he would if he had to. So some of them were small, for €500, or minor amounts like that, but he would call people in, and on one occasion they describe how a house where young kids were present or were living in the house at the very least, a house was smashed up, and then the photos were sent to Barry Young's phone, and that became part of the evidence then of him directing this criminal gang.
Because whatever else about having this very high-powered job in the wider criminal organisation, Barry Young didn't follow the rules of, what a lot of organised crime gangs would direct, that you don't keep and store messages. His phone was an absolute treasure trove.
Yeah.
There was something like 15,000 messages not deleted, wiped or anything on it. Or else was it just the WhatsApp network? You can go and find them again.
I don't know. I mean, he was using WhatsApp anyway. It didn't get into great detail about how they were recovered, but he seemed to have been using WhatsApp, which of course are encrypted, and there is you
can put the disappearing thing on them now.
Yeah.
on WhatsApp, can't you? Because I get confused when I read a message and then I think, did I imagine that? Do you do that? When normal people put disappearing on their phones?
Yeah, I do that now, yeah.
Do you?
Yeah, I do. Not that anybody ever sends me anything interesting or I ever say.
Yeah, because some of the stuff, like, you don't mind if it's sort of, you know, stuff that you can understand why it's disappearing, but when people sort of say to you, can I call it, or can I meet you somewhere? And then I go back and look to see the time and it's gone. There's nothing there.
Yeah.
And I think I've imagined it or I've dreamed it.
Yeah.
And I don't show up.
Exactly. Well.
So it's their fault, not mine.
It is, of course. But I think what happened was they arrested him and recovered the actual device, in which case they were accessible once they had the device.
Yeah.
Rather than his phone, like that, they recovered the messages through digital means. You know, I think they just got the handset.
Just got the phone and everything was there.
And they said actually when he was arrested on his way to Spain that his defence said he was delighted to be arrested. He was really happy, and that was the end of it.
All the stress.
All the stress was over, and every day he was trying to find peace with what he did, but he was delighted to have put it all behind him, you know.
It's really unusual to hear that kind of evidence go unchallenged in a court, especially in the Special Criminal Court, because in the end of the day, Barry Young was and is a violent criminal who has ruled, you know, with fear over the west and the northwest of the country. And a significant territory. We have seen evidence, or heard evidence during the sentence hearing that, you know, his tentacles reached up to Mayo and into Donegal, Leitrim. We know that he has connections with gangs in the north of Ireland, and it's obviously the Mr. Big network he's been working under as such in Dublin, a very dangerous, feared group of criminals. So it's kind of been a bit strange to hear this evidence of this guy living on his nerves, you know, running a gang of 20 and hoping for it all to end, hoping for the day that he gets caught, goes to court, and that he can, lie there and think of a new career?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a funny feature of Irish courts. I mean, we had this, of course, with Jonathan Dowdall as well, where, you know, if you just landed in a sentencing hearing and you heard the evidence given in the sentencing hearing, and the guards didn't necessarily contradict some of the things that the defence were being saying, you would have imagined Jonathan Dowdall really to have been somebody who just inadvertently got caught up in this. Of course, as he went through the Regency trial, other perspectives were given. But I think it's part of the credit that is given. Barry Young pled guilty really, really quickly. Mm-hmm. There was no long, protracted court battle. You know, he was arrested, I can't remember what date, but, you know, within a number of months, he had already pled guilty to the charge.
But when you see that there's 22,000 messages against him, you can understand that. That doesn't necessarily, in my world, that's why I'm not in the Special Criminal Court in the profession, or nor am I judge, because to me that would be, I would see that as opportunistic almost, because you're banged to rights and you're pleading guilty because you're trying to get shave off a few years. Which
of course is in the interest of the state, that people, if they've committed crimes, plead guilty quickly. And, you know, there has to be an incentive for people not to put the state through a long, protracted trial. Yeah. Obviously, as well, with Barry Young, you heard there was specific evidence about drug seizures and cash seizures, but it was relatively small amounts. I mean, not necessarily small, but really there was evidence of drug deals within a certain period of time of a certain amount. So they were talking about £500,000 worth of drugs and £110,000 worth of cash. They were obviously the deals that were there in text messages found on the phone. Whether other things had gone on before or not, I mean, look, we all know that other things had gone on before and they weren't included as part of it. So maybe that's part of the evidence that's there. But it is funny sometimes, the sentencing hearing, you know, it can contradict. And of course, look, I would say, you know, I'd say that's why a lot of these guys, even at the very top of the criminal ladder, that's how they're living. They are living in a state of permanent panic attack.
Do you think?
I really do, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there probably are a few complete, as to use Barry's term, mental header balls who aren't. But I'd say most of them. And Barry Young, actually, there has been some other stories in a range of publications, some good stories about how sort of shy and quiet he was as a teenager, and, you know, very polite to Gardaí when arrested and all of that. So there probably are other sides to these guys.
And he's that age we've spoken about again, when you start to navel gaze and you come out of that crazy 20s and you're sort of at an age, maybe you've kids, you're settling down and you're sort of looking towards the future. He's 38, of course. You know, you kind of wonder what it is you've done and achieved. And I think that's really when sometimes they start questioning it. Was it all worth it? And living like this and the worry and...
Yeah, where's it going to end, like, you know?
And employing 20 people is quite a lot of responsibility.
It is.
In the normal world.
It is.
If things go wrong at all, you know? And obviously, if a debt isn't collected, you can see there was a debt up the other way, was there not? They discussed.
There was, and that was, at one point, he was afraid of leaving his own house, it describes, where because of a drug debt that had resulted as a result of drug seizures. So, like, I think
that had gone up to about $500,000 he owed.
Yeah, but I can't remember the exact figure, but it was something like that, and it describes how he couldn't get out of his house. He was so terrified. I think a lot of those guys are living like that. I mean, they can't put that across. They can't be going around sharing their feelings with their 20 co-workers.
Yes.
But they are living
or with
like
anybody else, because you show weakness in that world.
Yeah.
And you're done for.
Yeah.
I'm actually in communication with somebody at the moment who is probably, you know, certainly not in his 20s, shall we say, and has been a long time member of the criminal fraternity.
Yeah.
Who is definitely seeing, you know, regretting, I think, his earlier life, regretting where he is now, not seeing a way out, using a ferocious amount of cocaine and living in just a constant whirl of binges, paranoia, coming down, having to make money, probably having to go back and apologise after the cocaine binges to many people. It is horrific.
Yeah, there's where how do you get off the train, I suppose?
How do you get off,
like,
exactly.
which stop are you going to get off on? And that's, you know, it's hard for people to step off on it
and
until...
all that I can see that this individual has is the designer T-shirts, the hats, the watches, probably a car, I don't even know.
Yeah.
But yeah, the gear. And like, would you not get totally fed up of it?
Yeah, but I mean, at what point do you step off, I suppose?
Yeah.
If there's still, you know, because they all owe money and they're all waiting for money to come in to pay off the other bit and all of that. So it's very hard for them to step off. And then exactly, like, if you've been you know, what are you going to do then? As I said, like, what are you going to do when you stop?
Yeah.
Are you going to get a job at McDonald's or go back to college, or, do you know, all of those things can be difficult.
But, you know, funny, we laugh at that, the idea of the job at McDonald's, but that's exactly, I think, what this individual I'm talking to, and I've spoken to others as well like that, almost aspires and wishes they had done. Was that job at McDonald's and earned an honest living. And if they'd got to this stage of their lives, they'd actually be able to enjoy life. And they mightn't be able to live permanently on a sun holiday, but they might be able to go for 2 weeks a year. And enjoy that, you know? Yeah,
so, I mean, that's not to downplay the effect of what Barry Young did and has been caught doing and has admitted doing, which is, remember, putting the fear of God into people over very, very small amounts of money. So you can say he felt this way, he felt that way, and no doubt I don't think that's a lie or untrue, but he certainly implanted that fear in others despite feeling it himself. So I don't know if he deserves sympathy. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't, but it's certainly you know, when you look at these things...
he's not worried about looking like a sort of a sissy or anything in prison.
Well,
obviously.
I don't know.
I mean, that's not...
I don't know people use that term anyway.
I know that's not a very gangland word, but, like, you know, it is that sort of sense of tough guys. And, I mean, going before the court and saying that you're terrorised, terrified, you were so delighted to be caught, and you were just living on your nerves. Is that okay?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, maybe it's you know, it's the woke world, Nicola. Maybe even criminals get to share their feelings without.
Do you reckon?
Without being judged. Now,
there was no mention during the sentence hearing of the other story up north that we're working on in a longer term project, but our colleague Ken Foy has written that Barry Young, that the PSNI intend to extradite him. So he's safely in prison now. So the PSNI have all the time in the world to develop their case against him. But we do know that he is the individual identified during court proceedings. It's a little bit complex to try and keep it really, really simple. When Robbie Lawler was killed in April of 2020, there was a sort of what was uncovered was what the PSNI say was a complicated plot to kill him, involving criminals from the south and using criminals and others in the north. The Dundons, members of the Dundon gang, Ger Dundon, Quincy Bramble and Nathan Killeen, were arrested but released and allowed to travel back to the south on the day of the murder. And the courts have insisted that they're not wanted going forward, even though, you know, we would say that it looked like they were involved actually in a double cross.
Well, but whether they were involved or not, they certainly were.
It certainly looks that way, and they were later found to be embedded with people who are suspected of ordering the murder. So, but in another part of the forest, 2 guys are charged in relation to the murder, not with actual murder, but with facilitating it. Charges related to that. And one of them, Adrian Holland, it's been described that he travelled to the south and met a serious player in organised crime in the run-up to this murder, and it was there that the two of them sort of created this plot to kill. Now, that individual we know is been identified as Barry Young.
Yeah.
So the PSNI may onward want him. The evidence that's been given during the sentence hearing about his sort of chaotic almost existence, how he owed drug debts, how he remained terrified and terrorised by other people and anxious, could ultimately feed into that as well.
Yeah, I mean, you didn't hear much about who. I mean, there was constant references, though, to the fact that he answered to other people in Dublin, and there was one occasion where they described as a layer of criminals above him in Dublin, and on another occasion they described how to enforce some of his debts he was able to. He had said he could get guys from the north down. So, like, we know that Barry Young has deep connections up there. As I said, this is a kind of a snapshot of his criminal activity, and his connections in the north are certainly deeply embedded in there. But yeah, like, I mean, he was named in what was a bail hearing actually up in the north. This meeting was referred to. It's not been tested in court. It's not been, there's no defence given against it from Barry Young, obviously, but certainly seems to have met one of the people that is facing charges.
And like anybody who may face charges in relation to a murder plot, the last place you want to be is the top of the tree.
Yeah.
You know, you do always want somebody to be above you if you're going to be facing those serious charges, which are, ultimately could result, if found guilty, in life imprisonment. So, in circumstances where you're the person who's making the directions and organising it, that's the worst place you can possibly be. So I'm just saying, it's interesting that a lot of this sort of, paranoid, scared existence has been read into one sentence hearing, and perhaps it could be useful for him in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think really what the case shows is the reality of drug dealing in rural Ireland, how it's become a really big business, and how the network, probably controlled by the guy we refer to as Mr. Big, seems to have these tentacles in mid-sized towns across Ireland, where they have somebody set up who's in charge of doing business there, how there's big money to be made. Any middle-sized town now in Ireland has got a market for drugs, and that this sort of franchise system sort of sells really seems to be something that the Mr. Big network and his broad set of connections have really capitalised on. Certainly, although the Kinahan network had very strong presence in places like Limerick, sort of some of that rural crime seems to have been left to other people, and they definitely seem to have people implanted like Barry Young in major centres across Ireland.
And of course, it's a growth basically, probably more so than the capital, even though there's much more of a population in it. It's really in those rural areas where they're seeing growth in the demand.
Yeah.
Don't know whether you listened to an interview I did recently with Colin O'Gara from the John of God's. He's head of addiction services there, and he's talking about the growth of men in their 50s and 60s starting to use cocaine.
Yeah.
Starting in places where it just wouldn't have been available before.
And
of course, they're having a drink and they go, oh, okay.
Yeah. And I mean, Sligo, of course, did have a sort of an established, gangland scene, but there's other towns, big to middle-sized towns, where there would have been no competition, and somebody can set up there and set up their own little cell network and really make a lot of money and stay under the radar.
So he is going to be sentenced in early July, I believe, and that'll just complete this case against him, the directing of a criminal organisation, which is a big charge, faces up to...
I think you can get a life...
Years?
Well,
Yeah.
you can get a life sentence for it. I doubt he will in this case. I mean, he did have a large number of convictions. I think it was 81 previous convictions. So that really will stand against him. Some of them are...
And the money laundering, of course, because he wasn't only directing the gang, but he was directing the money laundering. There was evidence heard about the type of businesses he set up and the bank accounts used, including some in Spain.
Yeah, I mean, he had set up a couple of businesses, a car business, as they all seem to do. And he also had another business in Spain that was registered to his own name. So that'll all become a feature. But I think in this case, there's a large number of previous convictions as well for drugs trade. So he will serve a significant sentence in prison. I think there's no doubt about that.
And the dismantling of his organisation is interesting because, of course, there are more coming. Some of those gang members are also... Presumably, they've also been caught by the WhatsApp messages, and the Gardaí have been able to establish exactly the structure of the gang, and there'll be more and more of them coming before the courts. Yeah,
there's a number of them facing charges already, but yeah, it'll be dismantled, I suppose, largely, and but there's no doubt somebody will be there to take their place anyway.
For sure, I was just about to say that. You took the words out of my mouth.
There you go.
Okay, Niall Donald, thank you.